The first shot shattered the morning calm at exactly 6:47 a.m., echoing across the pine-covered hills of northern Montana. Detective Sarah Chen dropped her coffee mug as the radio crackled to life with reports of armed suspects barricaded inside the Riverside Elementary School. What happened in the next 72 hours would expose a secret that hardware store clerk Rebecca "Becca" Morrison had been hiding for 8 years, and prove that some skills remain razor-sharp even when buried beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Becca Morrison was precisely where she wanted to be, invisible. For the past 5 years, she'd worked behind the counter at Hanson's Hardware in the small town of Cedar Falls, Montana, population 3,847. With her auburn hair always pulled back in a simple braid and her slight frame often hidden under practical flannel shirts, she blended seamlessly into the fabric of small-town life. Her customers knew her as the quiet woman who'd moved up from Colorado after a, quote, family situation, the one who had an uncanny ability to diagnose mechanical problems and could fix anything from chainsaws to farm equipment. She arrived at work every morning at 7 a.m., helped ranchers and hunters select the right ammunition for their needs, and left promptly at 6 p.m. No one questioned why someone so young seemed to know the ballistic properties of every cartridge in stock, or why she could estimate ranges and wind effects with the casual precision of someone who'd spent years calculating such things. Becca preferred it that way. She'd spent the last 8 years carefully constructing this unremarkable identity, learning to suppress the muscle memory that had once made her legendary in circles most people would never know existed. When hunters came in bragging about their long-range shots, she forced herself to nod politely and offer generic encouragement, ignoring the part of her mind that automatically calculated the adjustments they should have made. When local law enforcement stopped by for equipment, she served them with the same friendly professionalism she showed everyone else, never letting on that she could spot the tactical deficiencies in their gear loadouts at a glance. This particular Tuesday morning had started like any other. She was organizing the ammunition display, ensuring the hunting rounds were properly separated from the target shooting supplies, when the emergency sirens began wailing through the valley. Cedar Falls was small enough that everyone knew the sound meant something serious was happening, not just another medical call or minor fire. The bell above the hardware store door chimed as Sheriff Tom Bradley rushed in, his face grim with the kind of stress that comes from facing situations beyond normal experience. At 52, Bradley was a career law enforcement officer who'd spent his entire adult life in Cedar Falls, dealing with the occasional drunk driver, domestic dispute, or hunting accident. Nothing in his background had prepared him for what was unfolding at the elementary school. "Becca," he called, his voice tight with urgency. "I need to clear out all the ammunition. We've got a situation developing that requires us to secure all potential weapons and supplies in town." Becca looked up from the display case, immediately recognizing the controlled panic in Bradley's demeanor. "What kind of situation, Sheriff?" "Armed suspects have taken control of the elementary school," Bradley said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard by other customers. "We've got approximately 15 hostages, including 12 children and 3 staff members. The suspects are demanding safe passage and transportation, but they've made it clear they're prepared for an extended standoff." Becca felt her carefully maintained composure wavering as the implications hit her. Cedar Falls Elementary was a single-story building with large windows and minimal cover, designed for education rather than defense. The surrounding terrain offered multiple elevated positions that could provide tactical advantages, but the local sheriff's department had neither the training nor equipment to exploit them effectively. "How many suspects?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would complicate everything. 3 confirmed, Bradley replied, pulling out a tablet showing aerial footage from a state police helicopter. "All armed with semi-automatic rifles and sufficient ammunition for a prolonged engagement. They've positioned themselves to cover all approaches to the building, and our initial assessment suggests they have military or paramilitary training." Becca studied the aerial imagery with an intensity that made Bradley pause. Her eyes automatically tracked sight lines, calculated fields of fire, and identified the tactical weaknesses in both the suspects' positions and the building's layout. The analysis was instinctive, unavoidable, and completely at odds with her carefully maintained civilian persona. "I don't understand how this concerns the hardware store specifically," she said, forcing herself to sound like a concerned shop clerk rather than someone mentally developing assault plans. Bradley's expression grew more grim. "The suspects called our dispatch 20 minutes ago with specific demands. They want a Barrett M82 rifle, 200 rounds of .50 BMG ammunition, and a vehicle capable of off-road travel. They claim to know someone in town has access to that level of firepower." The specific mention of the Barrett rifle sent a chill through Becca's chest. The M82 was a semi-automatic .50 caliber rifle, capable of engaging targets at distances exceeding a mile, primarily used by military snipers and specialized law enforcement units. It wasn't the kind of weapon typically found in small-town Montana, and the suspect's knowledge of its presence suggested intelligence gathering that went far beyond random criminal activity. "Sheriff," Becca said carefully, "Hansen's Hardware doesn't stock anything like that. We deal in hunting rifles and standard ammunition. A Barrett 50 cal isn't something you'd find in a normal sporting goods inventory." "I know that," Bradley replied, studying her face with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "But here's the thing, Becca. You know more about firearms than anyone in this town. You can tell the difference between cartridges by looking at them. You understand ballistics better than our range instructor, and you've helped solve ammunition compatibility issues that stumped hunters with 30 years of experience." Becca's hands began to tremble slightly, a reaction she hoped Bradley wouldn't notice. "I just read a lot of technical manuals, Sheriff. It's part of providing good customer service." "Maybe," Bradley said, pulling out his phone and showing her a series of digital photographs. "Or maybe it has something to do with the fact that when I ran a background check on you this morning, I found some interesting gaps in your documentation." The phone screen showed Becca's employment records, lease agreements, and Colorado driver's license history. Everything appeared normal, exactly as she'd carefully arranged years ago. But Bradley scrolled to a section she'd never seen before, a series of federal database queries that had been flagged for manual review. "According to this," Bradley said quietly, "Rebecca Morrison didn't exist before age 22. No college records, no employment history, no credit report, no federal tax filings. It's like you materialized out of thin air as an adult, with a fully formed identity." Becca's mouth went dry. She'd been so careful, so thorough in creating her civilian identity, but she'd never considered that a crisis situation might prompt deeper investigation than the standard background checks required for employment. "People start over sometimes," she said weakly. "Bad relationships, financial problems, family issues that require distance." "That's what I thought too," Bradley interrupted, "until I started wondering why someone with no documented firearms training could provide tactical advice to our hunting safety instructor last fall. You corrected his information about long-range shooting techniques with an authority that suggested hands-on experience." The emergency radio clipped to Bradley's belt crackled with urgent communications from the scene at the elementary school. The dispatcher's voice carried the controlled tension of someone coordinating a crisis beyond the department's normal capabilities. "Sheriff Bradley, we need you back at the command post immediately. The suspects have fired warning shots and are demanding immediate compliance with their equipment requests. State police estimate 6 hours until tactical support arrives from Billings." Bradley keyed his radio while maintaining eye contact with Becca. "Dispatch, I'm securing potential resources in town. ETA 15 minutes. As Bradley spoke with his headquarters, Becca found herself automatically analyzing the tactical situation based on the radio traffic. 6 hours was an eternity in a hostage scenario, particularly with children involved. The suspect's specific equipment demands suggested they were planning either an escape route that required extreme range capabilities or a defensive position that could engage law enforcement at distances beyond the effective range of standard police weapons. More troubling was their apparent knowledge of specialized equipment in Cedar Falls. The Barrett rifle they'd requested wasn't something that would be common knowledge, unless they'd conducted detailed intelligence gathering or had insider information about the town's resources. "Becca," Bradley said, ending his radio conversation, "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to be straight with me. Have you ever operated a Barrett M82 rifle?" Becca stared at him, feeling the weight of 8 years of carefully maintained lies pressing down on her shoulders. Through the hardware store's front windows, she could see the elementary school in the distance, its cheerful yellow facade now surrounded by police vehicles and emergency responders. Somewhere inside that building, 12 children were depending on adults to make decisions that would determine whether they went home to their families that evening. The next words she spoke would determine whether Becca Morrison, hardware store clerk, could continue to exist, or whether she'd have to confront the identity she'd been running from for nearly a decade. "Yes," she said quietly, the admission escaping before she could stop it. Bradley's expression shifted immediately from suspicion to something approaching relief mixed with professional calculation. "What's your level of experience with the platform?" Becca closed her eyes, feeling the last of her defenses crumbling after years of careful construction. Enough to know that if those suspects get their hands on one, this situation becomes infinitely more dangerous for everyone involved. Bradley studied her face with renewed intensity. "Ms. Morrison, I'm going to need you to explain exactly what enough means in terms of operational capability." Before Becca could respond, the emergency radio erupted with urgent traffic from the elementary school. Multiple units were reporting that the suspects had moved to different positions within the building, suggesting they were adapting their defensive setup in response to law enforcement positioning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "They're not amateurs," Becca said, her voice carrying an authority that made Bradley lean forward attentively. "Professional kidnappers don't usually specify particular weapon systems unless they understand their tactical applications. The Barrett request suggests they're planning for either extreme range engagement or they want to deny law enforcement the ability to approach within effective range of standard police weapons." "How do you know that?" Bradley asked directly. Becca looked through the store windows toward the elementary school, where she could see the faint outline of police barricades being established at what appeared to be insufficient distances for the scenario they were facing. "Because I've used Barrett rifles in situations similar to this one." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession that changed the fundamental nature of their conversation. Bradley was no longer dealing with a helpful civilian who knew about firearms. He was talking to someone with operational experience in precision rifle applications. "Ms. Morrison," Bradley said carefully, "are you telling me you have a military or law enforcement background involving long-range precision shooting?" Becca met his gaze directly for the first time since the conversation began. "Sheriff, what I'm telling you is that if you want those children to come home safely, we need to start thinking about this situation very differently than your current approach." The transformation in her demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. The deferential hardware store clerk was being replaced by someone who understood tactical operations from the perspective of professional experience rather than academic knowledge. Bradley's radio crackled again, this time with a voice that carried barely controlled desperation. "All units, suspects are demanding proof that their equipment requests are being processed. They've given us 1 hour to show progress, or they'll execute one hostage as demonstration of serious intent." The timeline had just collapsed from 6 hours to 60 minutes, transforming an already dangerous situation into an immediate crisis that required decisions beyond the scope of normal law enforcement protocols. "Sheriff," Becca said, her voice now carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure, "I need you to understand something very clearly. Those suspects aren't going to wait for state police tactical support. They're going to escalate this situation long before help arrives." Bradley looked at her with an expression that mixed professional desperation with growing recognition that the quiet hardware store clerk might be his only option for preventing a massacre. "What are you suggesting?" Becca walked to the store's gun safe and began entering a combination that Bradley noticed she knew without consulting any written reference. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the right tool for the job isn't what people expect, and sometimes the person qualified to use that tool has been hiding in plain sight." The safe opened to reveal not just the standard hunting rifles expected in a small-town hardware store, but a carefully maintained Barrett M82 rifle that had clearly been stored with the precision of someone who understood its value and capability. Bradley stared at the weapon, then at Becca, as the full implications of her hidden resources became clear. "How long have you had that?" 8 years, Becca replied, running her hands along the rifle's familiar contours with the practiced movements of someone who'd maintained the weapon regularly despite having no apparent reason to possess it. "I've been hoping I'd never need to use it again." The emergency radio erupted with another urgent transmission, cutting through the tension in the hardware store with news that made both of them freeze. Command, we have movement in the school. Suspects appear to be preparing to execute their threat ahead of schedule. We need immediate tactical options or we're looking at casualties within the next 30 minutes. Bradley looked at Becca, then at the Barrett rifle, then back at her face, which had transformed from anxious civilian to focused professional in the span of their conversation. Ms. Morrison, he said formally, I need to know exactly who you are and what you're capable of. Because right now, you might be the only thing standing between those children and a tragedy that will haunt this town forever. Becca lifted Barrett from its case, her movements demonstrating the kind of familiarity that comes from extensive training rather than casual ownership. Sheriff, my name is Rebecca Morrison, and I haven't always worked in a hardware store. But before we continue this conversation, you need to understand that what I'm about to tell you will change everything about how you see this situation. The weight of 8 years of hidden truth was about to collide with an emergency that would force Rebecca Morrison to confront exactly who she'd been before she decided to disappear into the anonymity of small-town Montana. And with 12 children's lives hanging in the balance, she was running out of reasons to keep hiding. Sheriff Bradley's radio erupted with a transmission that made both of them snap to attention. Command, this is Sniper 1. I have eyes on the school from the water tower position. Suspects have moved 2 hostages to the front windows, appears to be adult staff members. They're using them as human shields while maintaining firing positions. Becca's jaw tightened as she processed the tactical implications. They're escalating faster than your people anticipated. Moving hostages to windows means they're preparing for either negotiation or demonstration killings. How can you possibly know that? Bradley demanded, though his tone suggested he was beginning to trust her assessment more than he wanted to admit. Instead of answering directly, Becca moved to the store's back office and returned with a spotting scope and rangefinder that definitely didn't belong in standard hardware store inventory. She positioned herself at the store's rear window, which provided a clear view of the elementary school across the valley. The distance to the target building is 847 yards, she said after a moment of calculation. Wind is currently calm, but thermal conditions suggest afternoon gusts up to 15 miles per hour from the southwest. Your sniper position on the water tower gives him angles on the front of the building, but no coverage of the rear exit or the maintenance building where they could have additional personnel. Bradley watched her work the spotting scope with practiced efficiency, making observations that were far beyond the capability of even experienced hunters. Rebecca, I need you to stop deflecting and tell me exactly what your background is. She lowered the scope and turned to face him, her expression carrying the weight of decisions she'd hoped never to confront again. First was a Marine Corps scout sniper for 6 years. Deployed 3 times to Afghanistan, twice to Iraq. My specialty was counter-sniper operations and high-value target elimination in urban environments. The revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow. Cedar Falls had been harboring not just someone with firearms knowledge, but a professional military sniper with combat experience in exactly the type of scenario they were facing. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why hide that kind of training? Becca's hands unconsciously moved to her left shoulder, where Bradley noticed she seemed to be touching an old injury. Because first left the Marine Corps after a mission went wrong. My spotter was killed because of a decision I made, and I couldn't continue doing work that got good people killed. Before Bradley could respond, his radio crackled with an update that changed everything about their timeline. Command, Negotiator 1. Suspects have provided new demands. They want evidence that the Barrett rifle is being retrieved within 15 minutes, or they'll execute the school janitor on live stream to demonstrate their commitment. Bradley grabbed Becca's arm, his desperation now overriding any concerns about protocol. Rebecca, I don't care what happened in the past. Right now, you're the only person in this county with the skills to deal with what we're facing. Will you help us? She stared out the window toward the elementary school, where she could see movement in the windows that confirmed her worst fears about the suspect's tactical positioning. Sheriff, you don't understand. The Barrett isn't just too much gun because of its power. It's too much gun because of what it represents. When you start using .50 caliber precision rifles in civilian environments, you're crossing lines that fundamentally change the nature of law enforcement. What lines? Becca began disassembling the Barrett with movements so fluid they appeared choreographed, each component handled with the reverence of someone who understood both its capabilities and its consequences. The Barrett M82 can engage targets at distances where conventional police weapons are useless, It can penetrate most vehicle armor and lightweight building materials. In the wrong hands, it's a weapon of mass destruction. In the right hands, it's a precision instrument that can end conflicts with surgical accuracy. Bradley watched her work, noting how she checked each component with the thoroughness of someone whose life had once depended on mechanical reliability. "Which hands are yours?" Quote. The question forced Becca to confront the identity she'd been running from for 8 years. For 6 years, they were the right hands. I had 47 confirmed kills, all of them people who were threatening innocents or coalition forces. I was one of the top-rated precision marksmen in the Marine Corps. She paused in her assembly process, her eyes distant with memories she'd tried to bury. Until a mission outside Fallujah, where I had to take a shot through a crowd of civilians. My spotter, Corporal Danny Reeves, was giving me wind corrections when an IED detonated near our position. I lost audio contact with him and had to make the shot without confirmation. Bradley remained silent, recognizing that she needed to tell the story that had driven her into hiding. The target was a sniper who'd been killing coalition forces for weeks. He was positioned in a building with civilians, using them as human shields. I had one opportunity for a clean shot before he moved to a position where he could kill more of our people. Becca's hand stilled on the rifle components as the memory consumed her attention. I took the shot. One round, 1,200 yards, through a window barely larger than a dinner plate. Perfect hit, eliminated the threat immediately. That sounds like exceptional marksmanship under difficult conditions, Bradley observed. It was, Becca said quietly, but when I went to check on Danny after the mission, I found out the IED blast had killed him instantly. I'd made the most important shot of my career without my spotter's confirmation, relying entirely on my own judgment in a situation where civilians could have been killed if I'd miscalculated. The weight of survivor's guilt was evident in her voice as she continued. Danny died because we were in that position, taking risks to eliminate a threat that was killing our people. I completed the mission, but I lost the best spotter I'd ever worked with. After that, I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Bradley began to understand the parallels between Becca's past trauma and their current situation. So you left the military because you couldn't handle the responsibility of making life-or-death decisions. I left because I realized that being exceptional at something that requires killing people isn't necessarily a gift. It's a burden that follows you wherever you go. The radio interrupted their conversation with news that made both of them freeze. Command, we have confirmation that suspects are armed with military-grade equipment. Thermal imaging shows at least 4 individuals inside the building, not 3 as originally estimated. They appear to have night vision capabilities and communications equipment that suggests professional military or paramilitary training. Becca's tactical instincts kicked in immediately. They've been planning this operation specifically for Cedar Falls. The knowledge of the Barrett rifle, the timing, the equipment selection, this isn't random criminal activity. What do you think they're really after? She resumed assembling the rifle while her mind processed the tactical indicators. They're not here for the children or the school. They're here for something else, and they're using the hostage situation to control law enforcement response while they complete their real objective. Bradley's radio crackled again with information that confirmed Becca's analysis. Sheriff Bradley, this is Agent Martinez from the FBI field office in Helena. We've been monitoring the situation and need to brief you on developments that change the threat assessment. Go ahead, Agent Martinez. The suspects aren't local criminals. We've identified them as members of a domestic terrorist cell that's been tracking federal witness protection relocations. They've been systematically hunting specific individuals who testified in a major organized crime case 8 years ago. The implications hit Becca like ice water. They're not here for random hostages, they're here for someone specific who's been hiding in Cedar Falls. Bradley stared at her as the pieces fell into place. Rebecca, 8 years ago, did you witness something that would make you a target for organized crime retaliation? Before she could answer, the radio delivered news that made her blood run cold. Command. Suspects have announced that they're looking for former Marine Sergeant Rebecca Morrison, and they'll continue executing hostages until she presents herself. The hardware store fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of Becca completing the Barrett assembly with hands that were now steady, despite the revelation that her carefully constructed anonymity had been compromised. They found me, she said quietly. After 8 years of hiding, they found me. Bradley's expression shifted from confusion to grim understanding. What did you see 8 years ago that made organized crime mark you for death? Quote, Becca attached the scope to Barrett with practiced precision, her movements becoming more confident as she accepted the reality of her situation. It wasn't what I saw. It was what I did. She moved to the window and began calculating firing solutions to the elementary school, her mind automatically processing variables that would affect long-range accuracy. During my last deployment, I was attached to a joint task force investigating weapons trafficking between military personnel and organized crime syndicates. My sniper skills made me valuable for surveillance operations. You were conducting intelligence gathering, not combat operations? Both, Becca replied, adjusting the scope's parallax settings for the distance to target. I documented illegal weapons transfers by organized crime figures who were bribing military personnel. My testimony sent 14 people to federal prison, including several high-ranking syndicate leaders. Bradley began to understand the complexity of their situation. So when you left the military after your spotter was killed, you entered witness protection because of the organized crime investigation. Exactly. The official story was that I'd suffered psychological trauma and requested discharge. The reality was that I'd become too valuable as a witness to remain in active duty where I'd be vulnerable to retaliation. Becca completed her firing solution calculations and turned to face Bradley with an expression that combined resignation with professional determination. Sheriff, those men in the elementary school aren't going to negotiate or accept any law enforcement response. They're here to kill me, and they'll murder every hostage in that building to force me into the open. Then we call in federal tactical support and evacuate you to safety. She shook her head, shouldering the Barrett rifle with movements that demonstrated years of muscle memory. Federal support is hours away, and evacuation isn't possible with an active hostage situation. Those children are going to die because criminals are using them to get to me. Bradley watched her transform from reluctant civilian to focused professional as she accepted the reality of their circumstances. What are you suggesting? Becca moved toward the store's rear exit, carrying the Barrett and additional equipment with the efficiency of someone preparing for a mission she'd hoped never to undertake again. I'm suggesting that sometimes the only way to save innocent lives is to give dangerous people exactly what they want. You're talking about presenting yourself as a target. I'm talking about ending this situation before anyone else gets killed because of decisions I made 8 years ago. Bradley followed her toward the exit, recognizing that the quiet hardware store clerk had been replaced entirely by someone who understood tactical operations from the perspective of professional experience. Rebecca, if you're wrong about your assessment, you'll be walking into a trap that gets you killed without saving anyone. She paused at the door, the Barrett rifle slung across her back in a configuration that suggested extensive field experience. Sheriff, 8 years ago I made a decision that got my spotter killed. Today, I'm going to make a decision that ensures no one else dies because I was too afraid to use skills that could make a difference. The radio crackled with an urgent update that eliminated any remaining time for discussion. All units, suspects have executed their first demonstration killing. Repeat, we have one confirmed hostage fatality. They're demanding Rebecca Morrison present herself within 30 minutes, or they'll continue executions at 15-minute intervals. Becca's expression hardened into the focused calm that had once made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective precision marksmen. Sheriff, I need you to coordinate with your people and give me clear fields of fire to the elementary school. This situation ends today. Bradley realized he was no longer dealing with a reluctant civilian consultant. He was working with a professional who'd made the decision to stop running from her past and accept responsibility for capabilities that could save lives. What do you need from us? Becca shouldered her gear and headed toward the door with the purposeful stride of someone who'd found clarity in the midst of chaos. I need you to trust that sometimes the weapon people call too much gun is exactly the right tool for the job. As they left the hardware store, both of them understood that the next few hours would determine whether Rebecca Morrison's 8 years of hiding had been cowardice or preparation for a moment when her exceptional skills could make the difference between tragedy and justice. The command post at Cedar Falls Elementary looked like a war zone when Rebecca and Sheriff Bradley arrived. FBI Agent Martinez, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, was coordinating with state police tactical teams, while local deputies maintained perimeter security. The organized chaos of a major law enforcement operation buzzed with radio chatter, tactical assessments, and the controlled urgency that comes from facing a situation beyond normal protocols. Sheriff Bradley, Agent Martinez called as they approached. "We need to brief you on intelligence developments that change everything about this operation." Rebecca hung back, letting Bradley take the lead while she studied the tactical setup. The law enforcement positioning was competent but defensive, focused on containment rather than resolution. She could see immediately that the current approach would lead to a prolonged standoff that favored the suspects. "Agent Martinez," Bradley said, "I need to introduce you to someone who may have critical information about this situation." Martinez turned to study Rebecca, her trained eyes taking in details that suggested more than civilian involvement. "And you are?" "Rebecca Morrison," she replied simply, watching as recognition dawned in the FBI agent's expression. "The Rebecca Morrison from the Castellano prosecution?" Martinez asked sharply. "You're supposed to be in protective custody in Oregon." "Clearly the protection wasn't as effective as promised," Rebecca observed dryly. Agent Martinez immediately grabbed her radio. "Command, this is Martinez. I need a secure channel for priority federal communications." She turned back to Rebecca. "Ms. Morrison, your appearance here explains everything about this operation. The Castellano syndicate has been systematically hunting federal witnesses for the past year." Rebecca felt the familiar weight of being hunted settling over her shoulders. "How many others have they found?" "You're the fourth target they've located." "The other three?" Martinez didn't finish the sentence, but her expression conveyed the outcome clearly. Sheriff Bradley intervened. "Agent Martinez, we can discuss witness protection failures later. Right now, we have 12 children and 2 adults still alive in that building, and the suspects are executing hostages every 15 minutes until Rebecca presents herself." "Absolutely not," Martinez said firmly. "Ms. Morrison is a federal witness under protection. We cannot allow her to be used as bait in a hostage negotiation." Quote. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made similar decisions under life-or-death pressure. "Agent Martinez, with respect, you don't have operational control over this situation. Those children are going to die while you debate federal protocol." Before Martinez could respond, the radio crackled with an urgent transmission from inside the school building itself. "This message is for Rebecca Morrison. You have 15 minutes to present yourself at the main entrance, unarmed and alone. For every minute you're late, we kill a child. We know you're listening, Sergeant. Come home." The use of her military rank made Rebecca's blood run cold. These weren't just organized crime enforcers. They had detailed intelligence about her service record and personal history. "They've done their homework," she said quietly. "This operation was planned specifically around my background and capabilities." Agent Martinez was already coordinating with federal tactical support. "Hostage rescue team is 45 minutes out. We need to buy time until proper assets arrive." "Those children don't have 45 minutes, Rebecca replied, moving toward the tactical display that showed the school's layout. "And HRT won't help anyway." The suspects chose this location because it's defensible against standard tactical approaches. She studied the building schematic with the practiced eye of someone who'd planned similar operations from the other side. Single-story construction with reinforced walls, limited entry points, clear fields of fire to all approaches. They've turned an elementary school into a fortress that neutralizes conventional law enforcement advantages. Sheriff Bradley watched her analyze the tactical situation with professional competence that impressed the federal agents. "Rebecca, what would you do if you were planning to take that building?" "I wouldn't take the building," she replied immediately. "I'd eliminate the threat from outside, using precision fire to neutralize targets without endangering hostages." Agent Martinez shook her head. "Ms. Morrison, federal policy prohibits using civilian contractors for tactical operations, especially in hostage situations involving children." "I'm not a civilian contractor," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd made peace with a difficult decision. "I'm the target they're trying to kill, and I'm the only person here with the capability to end this situation successfully." Before anyone could respond, movement at the school drew everyone's attention. The suspects had positioned themselves at classroom windows, using children as human shields, while maintaining firing positions that covered all approaches to the building. "Dear God," Bradley whispered, seeing 12-year-old Emma Patterson being held at the window by a masked gunman. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest as she watched the children being used as tools of intimidation. The part of her that had spent 8 years hiding behind hardware store anonymity was being overwhelmed by the Marine sniper, who'd once specialized in protecting innocents from exactly this type of threat. "Agent Martinez," she said, her voice now carrying the crisp professionalism of someone who'd switched into combat mode, "I need you to understand something very clearly. Those men have made a tactical error by using children as shields." "How is that an error?" Rebecca moved to the spotting scope position that had been established for surveillance. "Because they're assuming that concern for civilian casualties will prevent aggressive response. They're not accounting for someone with a capability to engage targets at precision ranges without endangering the hostages." Through the scope, she could see the suspect's positioning with clarity that made her tactical assessment complete. 3 confirmed shooters in defensive positions, but they're focused on ground-level approaches. They're not watching for elevated or extreme-range threats. Sheriff Bradley realized what she was suggesting. "You're talking about taking shots from outside their defensive perimeter." "I'm talking about using the Barrett M82 for exactly the kind of precision work it was designed to accomplish," Rebecca replied, adjusting the scope's focus to examine individual target windows. 847 yards to the nearest target position. Clear sight lines, minimal wind interference, and target differentiation that allows for precision engagement without collateral damage. Agent Martinez stepped forward. "Ms. Morrison, even if you could make those shots, federal protocol requires negotiation attempts before any tactical resolution." "How's negotiation working so far?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward the radio where demands were being repeated with increasing hostility. The answer came immediately as gunfire erupted from the school building. The suspects were firing warning shots into the air, demonstrating their willingness to escalate violence as their deadline approached. "All units, suspects are demanding immediate response," came the urgent radio transmission. "They're threatening to execute a hostage in 10 minutes if Rebecca Morrison doesn't present herself." Rebecca stood up from the spotting scope, her decision crystallizing as she watched the children's faces in the school windows. "Sheriff Bradley, I need you to coordinate with your people and establish clear fields of fire from the hardware store position." "You're going to attempt precision shots at that distance?" Agent Martinez asked incredulously. "I'm going to end this situation before anyone else gets killed," Rebecca replied, shouldering the Barrett rifle and additional equipment. "Agent Martinez, you can either support this operation or spend the next hour explaining to families why you prioritized federal protocol over their children's lives." Before Martinez could respond, the radio delivered news that eliminated any remaining time for debate. "Command, we have visual confirmation that suspects are preparing for another execution. They're moving a child to the front window." Rebecca's expression hardened into the focused calm that had once made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective snipers. The 8 years of guilt and self-doubt were being burned away by the clarity of purpose that came from protecting innocence. "Sheriff," she said, moving toward the position she'd identified for optimal firing angles, "I need you to coordinate your people so they don't interfere with precision fire. This operation succeeds or fails based on eliminating all threats simultaneously." Bradley realized he was no longer dealing with a reluctant witness hiding from her past. He was working with a professional who'd found her purpose in the most dangerous possible circumstances. "What do you need from us?" Rebecca was already calculating firing solutions as she moved toward her chosen position. "I need communication space during engagement, medical support standing by for hostage evacuation, and absolute trust that I can do what needs to be done." Agent Martinez made one final attempt to assert federal authority. "Ms. Morrison, if you proceed with this plan, you'll be operating outside all established protocols for hostage rescue." Quote. Rebecca paused long enough to meet the federal agent's eyes with an expression that combined professional competence with unwavering resolve. "Agent Martinez, those protocols don't account for someone with my specific capabilities in this exact situation. Sometimes the right answer isn't in the manual." As she moved into position, carrying the Barrett rifle with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years mastering its capabilities, Rebecca felt the weight of 8 years of hiding lifting from her shoulders. The hardware store clerk who'd been too afraid to use her skills was being replaced by the Marine sniper, who understood that exceptional capabilities came with the responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The elementary school stood 847 yards away, its yellow walls now marked by the shadows of armed men who thought distance and defensive positioning made them untouchable. They were about to discover that some weapons earned the designation too much gun, precisely because they could reach targets that others couldn't touch. Rebecca Morrison had spent 8 years running from her identity as one of the Marine Corps' most capable precision marksmen. Today, she was going to remember exactly why that reputation had been earned, and why some skills remain razor-sharp even after years of suppression. The siege was about to end, but not in any way the suspects had anticipated when they'd planned their operation around hunting a witness they'd assumed would be too afraid to fight back. Sheriff Bradley coordinated his deputies into support positions, while Agent Martinez reluctantly prepared to document an operation that would either save 12 children's lives or end in catastrophe that would haunt Cedar Falls forever. Rebecca found her firing position and began the final preparations for engaging targets at a distance where conventional law enforcement weapons were useless, but where the Barrett M82 became exactly the right tool for the most important job of her life. The hardware store's second floor had been converted into an improvised sniper's nest within minutes of Rebecca's arrival. She'd positioned herself at the rear window, which provided an unobstructed view across the valley to the elementary school. The Barrett M82 rested on a bipod she'd retrieved from storage, its massive frame steady despite the weapon's intimidating presence. Through her scope, Rebecca could see details that the ground-level observers had missed. The suspects weren't just holding hostages, they were systematically repositioning them to create maximum psychological pressure while maintaining tactical advantages. It was professional work that confirmed her assessment of their military training. "Overwatch, this is ground control." Sheriff Bradley's voice came through the radio system they'd established. "What's your assessment of target positioning?" Rebecca keyed her microphone while maintaining visual contact with the school. "Ground control. I have clear identification of 3 primary targets. Target Alpha is a northeast classroom, holding adult females hostage. Target Bravo is a central hallway position with 2 children. Target Charlie is a southwest classroom with multiple child hostages." She paused to recalculate wind conditions and thermal effects that would influence her shots. "Confirmed visual on all 12 child hostages. They appear unharmed but are being used as human shields in defensive positions." The tactical situation was more complex than anyone had anticipated. The suspects had turned each classroom into an individual strongpoint, connected by internal communications that allowed coordinated response to any law enforcement action. "Overwatch, this is Agent Martinez. The federal hostage rescue team is now 30 minutes out. Can you maintain observation until proper tactical support arrives?" Rebecca studied the scene through her scope, noting subtle changes in the suspect's behavior that suggested deteriorating patience. Ground control targets are becoming increasingly agitated. Body language indicates they're preparing to execute their deadline threat regardless of negotiation attempts. What she didn't share over the radio was her growing recognition of the tactical challenge she faced. 3 simultaneous precision shots at 847 yards, each requiring perfect accuracy to avoid civilian casualties, with no margin for error or follow-up attempts. Through the scope, she could see 8-year-old Marcus Thompson being positioned at the front window by Target Alpha. The child's terror was visible even at a distance, a reminder of what failure would cost. "All units, suspects are broadcasting final demand," came the urgent radio transmission. "Rebecca Morrison has 5 minutes to present herself, or they begin executing children." Quote. The deadline had accelerated beyond any possibility of federal tactical support arrival. Rebecca felt the familiar calm settling over her as she accepted the reality that professional capability sometimes required accepting impossible responsibility. "Sheriff Bradley," she said quietly into her microphone, "I need you to understand what I'm about to attempt. 3 precision shots in rapid succession, eliminating all threats simultaneously to prevent retaliation against hostages." Bradley's voice carried the strain of someone facing decisions beyond his training. "Rebecca, what are the odds of successful completion?" She performed final checks on her equipment while calculating probabilities that included wind conditions, target movement, and the mechanical limitations of even the most precise rifle system. Under optimal conditions with stationary targets, better than 90%. With moving targets using human shields, significantly lower. Define significantly lower. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, accessing memories of similar shots under combat conditions. 70% chance of eliminating all 3 targets without civilian casualties. 95% chance of eliminating at least 2 targets, with unknown consequences for remaining hostages. The statistics hung in the air like a death sentence for the children whose lives depended on mathematical probabilities that no training manual could adequately address. Agent Martinez's voice cut through the tactical channel with federal authority that carried desperation. "Ms. Morrison, those odds are unacceptable for a federal operation. We cannot authorize action with a 30% failure probability." "Agent Martinez," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the cold professionalism of someone who'd made similar calculations under fire, "those odds improve significantly compared to waiting for the suspects to begin executing hostages according to their stated timeline." Through her scope, she watched Target Bravo move toward the position where 10-year-old Sarah Chen was being held. The child's positioning suggested she would be the first execution victim if Rebecca didn't act within the next few minutes. "Ground control. I'm observing target movement that indicates imminent threat to the primary hostage. Request immediate decision on engagement authorization." Sheriff Bradley understood that federal protocol was about to collide with local reality in the most catastrophic possible way. "Rebecca, as the senior law enforcement officer on scene, I'm authorizing you to engage when you determine the tactical situation requires immediate action." Agent Martinez's voice erupted over the radio with protest that bordered on panic. "Sheriff Bradley, you do not have authority to authorize deadly force operations involving federal witnesses in organized crime investigations." "Agent Martinez," Bradley replied grimly, "I have authority to protect the lives of children in my jurisdiction using whatever resources are available. If you want to arrest me after we save those kids, I'll be happy to discuss federal jurisdiction issues." Rebecca turned out the jurisdictional argument and focused on her targets, beginning the mental preparation process that had once made her one of the Marine Corps' most effective long-range specialists. Breathing control, heart rate management, and the methodical elimination of external distractions that could interfere with precision shooting. Target Alpha had positioned himself where a miss could potentially strike the adult hostage he was using as cover. Target Bravo was moving between positions in a pattern that suggested paranoia about sniper threats. Target Charlie remained relatively stationary but was using 3 children as human shields arranged to make precision fire nearly impossible. "Overwatch to ground control," she transmitted. "I need tactical distraction at the front entrance in 30 seconds. Something to draw target's attention away from rear positions and create momentary exposure opportunities." "What kind of distraction?" Rebecca calculated angles and timing requirements for the sequence of shots she was planning. "Simulated negotiation approach. Single officer with megaphone, appearing to comply with suspect's demands. They'll focus on forward positions to monitor the approach." Bradley coordinated the distraction while Rebecca made final adjustments to her scope settings for the specific range and environmental conditions. The Barrett M82.50 caliber rounds would travel the 847 yards to target in approximately 1.2 seconds, requiring her to lead moving targets and account for their reaction to the sound of the first shot. "Ground control, initiating a distraction approach in 10 seconds, Bradley transmitted. Rebecca positioned herself for the shot sequence that would determine whether 12 children went home to their families or became casualties of a federal witness protection failure. The weight of their lives settled across her shoulders like a familiar burden she'd carried through 6 years of military service. Through her scope, she watched Deputy Miller approach the school entrance with a megaphone, creating exactly the distraction she needed. Target Alpha moved to the front window to assess the approaching officer. Target Bravo shifted position to support his partner. Target Charlie remained focused on his hostages but turned slightly toward the commotion. "Overwatch engaging," Rebecca transmitted, settling into the shooting position that had become second nature during her military service. The first shot took Target Alpha through the center mass, eliminating him instantly while leaving his hostage unharmed. The sound of Barrett's discharge echoed across the valley like thunder, announcing that the siege had entered its final phase. Target Bravo spun toward the sound, exposing himself for the 0.8 seconds Rebecca needed to acquire and engage. The second shot dropped him before he could process what was happening to his team. Target Charlie reacted with professional training, immediately moving toward his hostages with what appeared to be intent to execute them in retaliation. Rebecca's third shot caught him mid-stride, ending his life before he could carry out his threat against the children. 3 shots, 2.7 seconds of engagement time, 3 threats eliminated at a distance where conventional law enforcement weapons would have been useless. Ground control. All targets neutralized. Rebecca transmitted, maintaining visual observation of the school while law enforcement teams prepared for building entry. Hostages appear unharmed and are taking cover in defensive positions. The radio erupted with coordinated tactical traffic as deputies and state police moved to secure the building and evacuate the traumatized children. Rebecca remained in position, providing overwatch for the rescue operation while processing the reality that she'd just used lethal force for the first time in 8 years. Agent Martinez's voice cut through the tactical communications with professional assessment that grudgingly acknowledged what had just occurred. Overwatch, this is Federal Command. Outstanding marksmanship. All 3 targets were eliminated with no civilian casualties. Through her scope, Rebecca watched as 12 children and 2 adults were led safely out of the elementary school that had been their prison for 3 hours. Emma Patterson ran toward her parents with the resilience that only children possess. Marcus Thompson was carried by a deputy, but he was alive and unharmed. Ground control to Overwatch. Sheriff Bradley's voice carried relief that bordered on emotional breakdown. All hostages are confirmed safe. You just saved 12 children's lives. Rebecca lowered the Barrett rifle and sat back from her shooting position, feeling the weight of what she'd accomplished settling over her like a complicated mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She'd broken her 8-year hiatus from lethal force to protect innocence, but in doing so, she'd confirmed that her skills remained as sharp as they'd ever been. The hardware store clerk who'd been hiding from her capabilities no longer existed. In her place was Rebecca Morrison, former Marine sniper, who'd just proven that sometimes the weapon people call too much gun is exactly the right tool for the most important job imaginable. As law enforcement teams secured the elementary school and began processing the crime scene, Rebecca began disassembling the Barrett with the same methodical precision she'd used to deploy it. The weapon had served its purpose, but its use had fundamentally changed everything about her carefully constructed anonymity. The federal agents would want debriefings. The media would want interviews. The Castellano syndicate would want revenge for their failed operation. Her 8 years of hiding in Cedar Falls were over, but 12 children were alive because she'd finally stopped running from who she really was. Through the window, she could see parents reuniting with their children in scenes of joy that made every risk worthwhile. That image would stay with her forever, as proof that exceptional capabilities came with responsibilities that couldn't be avoided when lives hung in the balance. 24 hours after the siege, Rebecca sat in a secure conference room at the Helena FBI field office, staring at photographs that made her stomach churn. Agent Martinez had spread out surveillance images, financial records, and communication intercepts that painted a picture of systematic hunting that stretched far beyond Cedar Falls. The Castellano organization has been tracking federal witnesses for 18 months, Martinez explained, pointing to a timeline that showed methodical stalking across multiple states. You were target number 7 on their elimination list. Quote, Rebecca studied the faces of the 6 witnesses who'd been killed before the organization reached her. Teachers, accountants, construction workers. Ordinary people who'd found themselves in possession of extraordinary information about organized crime operations. How did they find us? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would be more disturbing than simple detective work. Agent Martinez opened a laptop displaying encrypted communications that had been recovered from the suspect's equipment. They had inside help. Someone within the Federal Witness Protection Program was providing location data, new identities, and security protocols. The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. For 8 years, she'd trusted that her safety depended on government systems designed to protect witnesses who'd risked their lives to testify against dangerous criminals. Learning that those same systems had been compromised felt like a betrayal that went beyond professional failure. Who? She asked simply. Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Garrett, Martinez replied, displaying personnel files that showed a 20-year law enforcement career ending in corruption charges. He'd been gambling heavily, accumulated massive debts, and the Castellano organization offered him enough money to solve his problems. Rebecca studied Garrett's photograph, trying to reconcile the professional appearance with the reality of someone who'd sold witness information to the criminals they'd testified against. How many witnesses did he compromise? 14 confirmed cases over the past 2 years. The Castellano organization used his information to systematically eliminate anyone who could testify in future prosecutions. Agent Martinez pulled up additional files showing the scope of the investigation that had grown from Rebecca's case. Your successful defense of the elementary school exposed the entire network. The The suspect's communications equipment contained evidence that's allowing us to roll up organized crime operations across 6 states. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. Her attempt to hide from the consequences of her military service had ultimately led to a law enforcement breakthrough that would prevent other witnesses from facing the same threats she'd endured. "What happens now?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would complicate her life in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. Martinez closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal concern. "Rebecca, your actions yesterday have made you simultaneously a national hero and a high-priority target for every organized crime syndicate in the country." Before Rebecca could respond, the conference room door opened to admit Assistant U.S. Attorney David Chen, who'd flown in from Washington specifically to discuss her situation. Chen was a career prosecutor with extensive experience in organized crime cases, and his presence indicated federal attention at the highest levels. "Ms. Morrison," Chen began without preamble, "yesterday you saved 12 children's lives and exposed a corruption network that's been murdering federal witnesses for 2 years. The Justice Department wants to offer you something that's never been provided to a witness protection participant." Rebecca felt her carefully reconstructed world shifting again as federal priorities collided with her desire to return to anonymity. "What kind of offer?" Chen opened a briefcase containing documents that carried security classifications indicating major policy changes. "Full reinstatement of your military rank, assignment to a joint federal task force specializing in precision operations, and operational authority to engage organized crime targets using the same capabilities you demonstrated yesterday." The offer was everything Rebecca had once thought she wanted, and everything she now feared. Return to professional respect, utilization of her exceptional skills, and the kind of responsibility that had driven her into hiding after her spotter's death. "You're asking me to become a federal assassin," she said bluntly. "We're asking you to become what you already are," Chen replied. "One of the most capable precision specialists in the country, working within legal frameworks to protect innocent lives from organized crime violence." Agent Martinez added supporting information that made the offer more compelling. "Rebecca, the Castellano organization isn't going to stop hunting you because their Cedar Falls operation failed. They'll send more teams, better equipped and better trained, until they eliminate the threat you represent to their operations." Rebecca understood the tactical reality of her situation. She could continue hiding, accepting that organized crime would eventually find and kill her, or she could use her capabilities proactively to eliminate threats before they materialized. "What about the other witnesses who are still at risk?" Chen smiled grimly. "That's exactly why we need someone with your combination of tactical expertise and personal investment in witness protection. You understand both the operational requirements and the human cost of failure." The federal offer represented everything Rebecca had spent 8 years trying to avoid: high-stakes responsibility, life-or-death decision-making, and the constant pressure of knowing that other people's survival depended on her professional capabilities. But yesterday's successful resolution of the elementary school siege had proven that hiding her skills didn't protect anyone. The children she'd saved were alive because she'd finally accepted responsibility for capabilities that couldn't be safely ignored. How would this task force operate? Martinez pulled up organizational charts showing a proposed structure that combined FBI investigative resources with military precision capabilities. Joint operations targeting organized crime leadership using surgical strikes rather than conventional law enforcement approaches. "You're talking about targeted killing operations on American soil." "We're talking about eliminating threats that conventional law enforcement can't address effectively," Chen corrected. "The same kind of precision operations you conducted in military service, but focused on protecting American civilians from domestic organized crime violence." Rebecca studied the proposed structure, recognizing both its potential effectiveness and its dangerous implications for constitutional law enforcement. This crosses lines that fundamentally change the nature of domestic law enforcement. Those lines were crossed when organized crime syndicates began systematically murdering federal witnesses, Chen replied. "We're simply responding with capabilities appropriate to the threat level." The philosophical implications were staggering, but Rebecca couldn't ignore the practical reality that conventional approaches had failed to protect witnesses whose only crime was cooperating with federal investigations. What about oversight and accountability? Martinez opened additional files showing judicial review processes and congressional notification requirements. Every operation requires federal judicial approval and is subject to the same oversight as other classified federal activities. Rebecca realized she was being offered the opportunity to do work that mattered while using skills that had been wasted during 8 years of hardware store anonymity. The federal task force represented purpose, professional respect, and the chance to protect innocent people using capabilities she'd spent her military career developing. I need time to consider the implications. Time is exactly what we don't have, Chen said urgently. The Castellano organization's Cedar Falls failure has accelerated their timeline for eliminating remaining witnesses. We've identified imminent threats against 3 other protected witnesses that require immediate intervention. The weight of other people's lives pressed against Rebecca's reluctance to return to work that involved killing. Yesterday's siege had proven she could still make the shots that mattered, but it had also reminded her of the psychological cost of bearing responsibility for life-and-death outcomes. Agent Martinez leaned forward with an expression that mixed professional assessment with personal appeal. Rebecca, yesterday you demonstrated that exceptional capabilities come with responsibilities that can't be avoided when innocent lives are at stake. The federal task force would formalize that responsibility within legal frameworks designed to protect both operators and civilians. Rebecca looked out the conference room window toward the Montana landscape where she'd spent 8 years trying to become someone ordinary. The hardware store clerk who'd fixed chainsaws and sold ammunition to hunters no longer existed, replaced by someone who'd accepted that her military training carried obligations that transcended personal comfort. When would this assignment begin? Chen's relief was visible as he opened the briefcase containing federal appointment documents. Immediately. We have operations planned that require your specific combination of precision marksmanship and tactical expertise. As Rebecca signed the papers that would end her civilian anonymity and return her to federal service, she realized that yesterday's successful defense of the elementary school had been less about ending a crisis than about accepting who she really was. The Barrett rifle hadn't been too much gun for the situation. It had been exactly the right tool in the hands of someone finally ready to use it. 6 months later, Rebecca Morrison stood on the observation deck of a federal training facility in Quantico, Virginia, watching a new class of precision specialists complete their final qualifications. The morning mist hung over the ranges where students were engaging targets at distances that pushed the boundaries of what most people considered possible with rifle fire. Instructor Morrison called Agent Sarah Walsh, one of the 12 specialists Rebecca had been training for the Joint Federal Task Force. I'm having difficulty with the wind calculation on Target 7. Rebecca moved to Walsh's position, noting immediately that the younger woman was overthinking environmental factors that should have become intuitive after months of training. What's your instinctive read on the conditions? Crosswind from the left at approximately 12 miles per hour, Walsh replied, but the trees are showing different movement patterns at various distances. Trust your instincts over the mechanical calculations, Rebecca advised, watching as Walsh adjusted her scope settings with growing confidence. Your subconscious processing of environmental cues is more accurate than mathematical formulas when you've developed proper experience. Walsh took the shot, striking the target at 1,100 yards with precision that would have been exceptional for veteran military snipers. Direct hit, center mass. Rebecca smiled, remembering her own struggles with long-range shooting during Marine Corps training. The difference was that Walsh and the other task force specialists were learning to apply precision marksmanship against organized crime targets rather than foreign combatants, requiring different psychological preparation for domestic operations. Outstanding work, Rebecca told the class as they completed their qualifications. Next week, we begin operational deployment training using real-world scenarios based on active federal investigations. As the students secured their equipment and departed for debriefing sessions, Rebecca reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the Cedar Falls siege. The federal task force had conducted 17 successful operations, eliminating organized crime leadership while protecting witnesses who would have been murdered under conventional law enforcement approaches. Agent Martinez approached carrying files that indicated new operational requirements. Rebecca, we've received intelligence about a situation that requires your personal attention. What kind of situation? Martinez opened the files to reveal surveillance photographs and intercepts related to the Castellano organization's attempts to rebuild their witness elimination program. They've hired a contract sniper with military training comparable to yours. someone capable of engaging federal witnesses at distances beyond our normal protective capabilities. Rebecca studied the intelligence data, recognizing the tactical challenge represented by an adversary with professional precision capabilities. Do we have identification on the contractor? Former Army Special Forces, discharged under circumstances involving unauthorized weapons sales. Marcus Volkov, age 34, with confirmed kills in multiple conflict zones before transitioning to criminal operations. The photograph showed a lean man with pale eyes and the kind of intense focus that Rebecca recognized from her own military service. Volkov represented everything dangerous about precision marksmanship skills being applied without moral constraints or legal oversight. Current target? Martinez pulled up additional files showing witness protection records for a family in Oregon whose testimony had exposed Castellano money laundering operations. David and Jennifer Hayes relocated 2 years ago with their 8-year-old daughter. Local law enforcement has been notified, but they don't have capabilities to counter a professional sniper threat. Rebecca understood immediately why the case required her personal involvement. Conventional protective details were designed to handle close-range threats, not precision rifle attacks from distances where standard law enforcement weapons were ineffective. When do I deploy? Tonight, Martinez replied. Volkov's communications suggest he's already in position and planning to engage within the next 48 hours. As Rebecca prepared for what would be her most personal operation since joining the federal task force, she reflected on how the Barrett rifle that had once seemed like too much gun had become an essential tool for protecting innocent lives from threats that conventional law enforcement couldn't address. The Oregon deployment took place under autumn conditions that reminded Rebecca of her Montana home. She established overwatch positions around the Hayes family residence, using thermal imaging and advanced surveillance equipment to detect any approach by a hostile sniper. On the second night, her equipment detected movement in a tree line approximately 900 yards from the target house. Through her scope, Rebecca identified a shooter in a concealed position with what appeared to be a .338 Lapua Magnum rifle, a weapon system capable of precision fire at the ranges Volkov would need to engage his targets. Federal Command, this is Overwatch, she transmitted to the coordination team. I have visual contact with a hostile sniper in position to engage protected witnesses. Request authorization for immediate intervention. Overwatch, you are authorized to engage hostile threats using necessary force to protect federal witnesses. Rebecca settled into the shooting position that had become second nature during her months with the task force. The distance to the target was 923 yards, requiring adjustments for wind conditions and the elevated angle of her position relative to Volkov's concealment. Through her scope, she could see Volkov preparing to engage the Hayes family as they moved around their home, unaware that death was watching them through a precision rifle scope. Rebecca felt the familiar calm settling over her as she accepted responsibility for eliminating a threat that conventional law enforcement couldn't counter. The Barrett M82's .50 caliber round traveled the distance to target in 1.3 seconds, ending Volkov's threat to federal witnesses permanently. The contract sniper who'd been hired to murder a family because they'd testified against organized crime was eliminated before he could carry out his mission. Federal Command, hostile threat neutralized, Rebecca transmitted. Protected witnesses are secure. As local law enforcement processed the scene and federal agents coordinated with witness protection officials, Rebecca realized that her work with the task force had found its purpose. She was using exceptional capabilities to protect people who'd risked their lives to cooperate with federal investigations, ensuring that their courage didn't result in death sentences from organized crime retaliation. 3 weeks later, Rebecca received a letter that made her understand the full impact of her transition from hiding to operational deployment. Jennifer Hayes had written to thank the, quote, unknown federal agent who'd saved her family from assassination. My daughter Emma asks me every day if the bad men are going to hurt us, Hayes had written. I can tell her honestly that there are good people watching over us, people with the skills and courage to protect families like ours when we can't protect ourselves. The letter reminded Rebecca of the children she'd saved during the Cedar Falls siege, proof that exceptional capabilities carried responsibilities that couldn't be avoided when innocent lives hung in the balance. Standing in her Quantico office, surrounded by commendations and operational reports from successful task force missions, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had taken her from hardware store anonymity to federal service. The Barrett rifle that critics had called too much gun had become exactly the right tool for protecting people who deserved to live safely after doing the right thing. Her 8 years of hiding had ended not because she'd overcome her fear of responsibility, but because she'd finally accepted that some skills couldn't be safely ignored when others needed protection. The federal task force had given her purpose, professional respect, and the opportunity to use exceptional capabilities in service of principles that mattered. Rebecca Morrison had stopped running from who she was, and in accepting her identity as one of the country's most capable precision specialists, she'd found peace with the burden that came from being exceptional at something that required perfect judgment and absolute commitment. The siege at Cedar Falls Elementary had lasted 3 days, but its resolution had taken 8 years of hiding to complete. Some weapons earn the designation "too much gun" precisely because they're capable of solving problems that others can't touch. In the hands of someone finally ready to accept the responsibility that comes with exceptional capability. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.